Welcome along to the Make It Count podcast. My name is David,
And I'm, uh,
and we're the Taylor Bros, and we're having a great time. And it's great to be here with you today. And we're talking about turning insight into action. And I'm wondering, Matt, if you wanted to get us started on this conversation.
Absolutely. As we're just laughing our way in, this is our third take, I think. Uh, I like this topic. We've talked quite a lot over just many episodes we've done. I think this is 87 now. So often the concept of, it starts with some kind of awareness, a breakthrough in making a change in improving and growing starts with an awareness. But I think if it stops with awareness or it stops with an insight, then you haven't really done anything and you haven't grown and you haven't actually made a change. It's great, this great film moment in the Lord of the Rings trilogy where the bad guys, the orcs, are attacking the city, and this guy comes and he goes, "They've broken through our defenses," and then the reply is, "It is as Lord Denethor predicted. Long has he foreseen this doom." And then Gandalf, "Foreseen and done nothing." And it's this great, like, smackdown, but it's exactly that. It's like, you can foresee something, you can have an insight about something and do nothing. And at the end of the day, what that means is, in this situation, the orcs broke through because they weren't prepared for it, And I think for me, the question I had when we are thinking about this was, when have I had an insight and done nothing with it?
Yeah, and so it was interesting because insight means a lot to a lot of different people. And I suppose I wanted to quickly check that what I thought an insight was what was understood by other people as what an insight is. And I would say an insight is that moment of like clarity or a new thought or a new way of understanding something. Whereas actually a more common definition of insight would be something that is accurate and deep understanding. So an accurate and a deep understanding. Oh, that's quite interesting, isn't it? That there's this idea of like a deeper understanding. And what does it take to get a deeper understanding in anything? Well, you have to put time into it. You have to put reflection into it. You have to notice what's going on to even get to that level of deep understanding, to even get the insight before you can put it into action. So I just thought that was a little bit interesting there. Like you said, in that story in Lord of the Rings, he has this deeper understanding of all these macro things that are going on, but didn't do anything about it. And it was an
Yeah.
accurate understanding as well. And I suppose most of us are not in war zones or whatever, but we have these understandings about who we are and about who the people we work with are. So we know about ourselves, about other people, or we know about things that we're expert in. We have these deep understandings, but we don't always put them into action. And that is the interesting part of this conversation, really.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting thing. I like that you took that time to look into insight. I hadn't thought about that. In that quote, it's kind of, he's saying for foresight, and I wonder what the difference between foresight and insight is. But we're not necessarily looking at foresight so much, although maybe that can play into it, and that could. There is an aspect of, again, some of the things we've talked about: thinking long term, acting short term, having that end in mind, the end of your life. How do I want to have lived? How do I want people to talk about me and to remember me after I'm gone? And that could potentially feed into our foresight. The insight being that, I like that definition of, it's that deep and accurate understanding. I think the accurate part's really important as well. That's why awareness is so key. If you don't have the correct knowledge and the accurate knowledge of something, then any action you pull from that is likely to be flawed, and you're probably going to end up moving in the wrong direction because you have a false understanding. So it is important to have the insight first. But I suppose my question is, how do we move from that insight into the action? I mean, a couple of small examples I can bring up from more contemporary of when I haven't necessarily turned an insight into an action. A few weeks ago, we did the Indistractable book review, And just one of the things he was talking about, and it was in the section of the book on hacking back external triggers, is basically just some of the classic things of don't have your phone in your office space, set scheduled hours to check your email in the day. And even though I now have that, I have that insight, it's quite clearly obvious. Like if I'm constantly having my email inbox open, if I'm constantly having my phone nearby, and I can just pick it up at the moment as soon as I'm kind of finishing a task, or as soon as there's an interruption in a task, or it's like, I'm struggling a little bit here. Okay, I'll just do something else. I've interrupted, and I haven't yet been consistent in applying the action of, well, the thing to do then is to not have my inbox open all the time, but to set a time to do that. And again, not have my phone next to me all day long, but to have a time to check messages. And that allows me to then be, totally 100% focused on that whilst I'm doing it. It's not a distraction, it is traction for what I want to do then. But I've done that sometimes, but the action hasn't become fully consistent. It's not in me yet. And so sometimes that leads to, I get distracted.
And this is why I thought it was interesting to start with the idea of insight and what leads to that and what we understand by insight. Because I think one of the things most of us understand by insight is this idea of information and knowledge. And like, now I know that thing, I've learned it, that's brilliant. And actually, but as you said, these things, you have information on it, you believe it, you agree with it, but you haven't done anything with it. But that's because we think learning is primarily a mental thing, something that goes into the brain, and once it's in your brain, you know it. But actually, that isn't about changing or becoming it. And I thought that was interesting, that I think if we limit, well, we have a high value on learning something or even on knowledge, but actually we don't understand that learning happens more than just in a mental space. We won't turn it into action. And there's something different from knowing something in your head to doing it. Doing it is still a learning. When you see the children that might go onto YouTube and they'll watch some skills from a famous football or basketball star, like how to do this thing, and they'll watch it and they'll watch it and they'll watch it. No, now they've seen how to do it. Now they know how to do it. No, now they have to go on the playground or on the field or on the court and put it into practice before they know it, before there's an insight into action, before there's an embodiment of it. And I think that's where I think we both came across this quote. I can't remember exactly where it was, but it's like, there's the allure of the insight. Like once we can name it, once we can say, I know it, we often stop there because it feels great to know it, but actually much more challenging to put that into action.
I think that's spot on. And the thought that came to my mind as I was going, what is it about an insight that is so alluring? Or why do we maybe get stuck at the insight? I think there's an element of the insight, because it is a deeper understanding, a deeper knowledge, and it kind of goes back to the old phrase, knowledge is power, right? And I think that's really ingrained in our thinking deep below. We kind of equate, if I understand something, I can therefore control it. And control is what we're after, rather than necessarily growth or being transformed, or just sometimes we have to accept. But no, we quite like the idea of control. And so if I understand something, therefore I control it. But obviously the reality is that's not true at all. You can well I was going to use a bit more of a I'll use a bit more of an on the nose example. I think every single one of us can know, I can understand, like, checking my social media in the middle of when I'm having a conversation with someone in front of me isn't actually the best thing for that conversation. I think everybody can mentally assent to that. We understand that and know that. But how many of us have actually done that anyway? I'm in a conversation or there's a group of friends and I've checked out of that so that I can check, that knowing something doesn't necessarily mean that I have control over it. It can still have control over me. And I think so the move we want to make is, how do we get it out of our brain and into our body almost.
Yeah. And I think that idea that we have these insights, well, one, I think if we think about insights as information, there's so much information out there that comes our way that actually we couldn't possibly apply all of it. So I think, and maybe there's a relationship, I don't know, but the more information you engage with, the less likely you are to apply it. The sort of, paradox of choice, when there's three jams, they sell way more than when there's 28 different jams, which is really interesting. And so I wonder if there's like, oh, the more information you engage with, the less likely you are to actually make any changes because
Yeah,
it's all just another bit. But also, deeper understanding is hard. I think that's one of the reasons why we love the personality tests, whether it's the Myers-Briggs or the DISC or the Enneagram, because they're like a shortcut to having that deeper understanding. But even then, even when we have this deeper understanding, many of us don't like to put any of that insight into action.
mhm,
And maybe that's, is it Carol Dweck that has sort of the fixed and growth mindset stuff? And it's like, actually, if we don't have this mindset of I can grow, I can develop, you're just going to take that insight and go, well, that's just who I am. That's just how I show up. That's just who I am in the workplace, or who I am in a relationship. And actually, that's where you've had the insight, but instead of like thinking, how can I change that? How can I put that into action? We've thought, well, that's just me, and usually it's about things that we know are like either not socially acceptable, or it's poor behavior, or not normative. But we've had this insight but haven't done anything with it.
absolutely. And that's something that I was listening to someone recently talk about. One of the things that they actually find, well, they've kind of moved away a little bit of from some of these because of the way that something like the Enneagram or Myers-Briggs and stuff have been used and the way they're used. Um, Instead of it being this kind of, here's a lens through which you can see an aspect of your life and therefore grow in it, it kind of becomes a tool of, well, this is me and that's how I am, or even worse, like this is you, and so that's such a that kind of personality type thing to do. And
Mm,
so we use it as a labeling thing, as very much in that fixed mindset thing, rather than, I think this is where we're moving towards, we want to be turning insights into action because we want to be in that growth mindset. We want to be going, this is maybe currently me, and this is maybe historically me, this insight, like, but actually it doesn't have to be future me, it doesn't have to be today and tomorrow me.
mm. Yeah, so I think we actually probably have insights all of the time. And I suppose one of the things that we do in coaching is we go deeper. When I'm coaching with somebody, we're pulling out the things. Oh, this is something you want to grow in, or this is a problem that you're facing at the moment. Well, let's go into that a little bit. Hey, what's underneath that? Or sometimes you end up like, what's the belief here that we're wrestling with? And you get this deeper understanding that you realize, oh, we thought we were talking about this, but actually underneath that is this, and this is what's been the hiccup.
Mm.
But at the end, we end up going, well, based on what we've talked about, based on some insights that we've had during this conversation, what's some action you're going to take moving forward? And that's really important. And I remember on my coaching course that there were lots of people, and I get the impression from the instructor that this is quite normal. Lots of people come to coaching from a place of, hey, I'm quite good at listening, like that sort of empathetic listening, like my friends with colleagues, I listen, and they'll tell me all these things, and they'll feel a bit like of a catharsis from processing it, but actually nothing changes, and they sort of feel a bit taken advantage of, and they like the element of like coaching helps me help them take their insights and put them into action. And I think we've all met those people, haven't we, where they can tell you the problem. They've had all this insight. You're listening to them and they're like, hey, and this thing happens, and when this happens, and then this is how I am, and this is how this other person is, and this is always all annoying me. And it's like, okay, so you've perfectly explained the situation, right? You have all this insight about the reality of what's going on. So what? Like, what are you going to do about that? Like, now
Mm.
you have an accurate picture of what's going on. Theoretically, you have an accurate picture of what's going on, but most of us probably don't, me included. But we're very biased in a whole number of ways. But you have a picture. Now what? And I think sometimes we don't like that idea of being forced to actually take responsibility for the insights we've had, for what we've noticed around us, and put that into action.
Mm, that's spot on. I really like those two questions as well. They're a bit on the nose, but there's some, that once you've had the insight, or you can. I mean, the way that I was introduced to these by you was kind of when you're listening to someone talk, whether it's being, whatever context it is, if they're giving you a presentation, two questions really that you're asking, certainly towards the end as they're rounding up, is okay, given all you've said, you know, so what and what now? So like, why should I care? And if I should care, what do I do now about it? And I think that's something that maybe can be two questions that potentially could help everyone here as we're thinking, okay, I've had an insight, so maybe I'm in a coaching conversation, or maybe I've been doing some journaling, or just I've been thinking about something, ruminating about something, and I've finally had a bit of a breakthrough and an insight. Oh, that is what's underneath. So what? Knowing that, how does that help you? And if you can take that, what now? What do I do with that now? That's a potentially valuable piece of information. But will I just put that gold back in my rucksack and just be like, whenever that situation comes up, I go, yeah, I know why that's happening. Well, great. Well, what are you going to do about it now?
And I think many times we don't want to do anything about it. We're quite familiar with ourselves. Making that change means losing some of the old identity, some of the old self, and moving into a new identity. But I also think many times we don't actually notice. Matthew Dix has done a TED talk called Homework for Life, which is this idea that every day you should write down one sentence, maybe two, of like, if you had to tell a story from today, what would that story be? But his main thing about stories are like essentially 2 to 5 second moments, a moment of realization or a moment of transformation. And him and his wife do a podcast called Speak Up, or did. I don't know if they're still releasing new episodes, but he told this homework for life of his son who's 6 years old, and they were deciding like what sport he would start doing next like week or next term or whatever, I don't know. And he just sort of said, oh, I don't mind losing, but I don't want to be responsible for the team losing. And so he was like trying to pick like the least competitive one, the one based on the one least likely to do this. And then Matthew Dix, the father, he's basically just gone, oh, I've had this insight that the way I've been watching and engaging with sport, and I'll blame that one athlete, and my son has been affected by that. And it's this moment of realization that how he's lived his life has impacted his son. That's a great story, but also it's a really like, and he's going away now going, maybe I need to think about like how I can help him, but how I'm showing up and talking about that, because of course it makes no sense to blame one person for a team loss, but that's affected how what his son wants to do. And so it's this really powerful realization that, oh, I show up in this way, so this. But many times we would hear that our son or our friend or our brother or anybody in our life say this thing, and we wouldn't notice it. And so his thing is, do this every day. You'll start noticing these moments. You'll have the realization, and then you'll be able to start thinking, how do I put that into, for him, it's how do I tell a better story? But also it's how do I live a better life as well?
Wow. That's incredible. And I totally, yeah, as he's telling that story, and that as soon as he makes that link of, oh yeah, that's probably, that's related to the way that I've been watching sport and he's been watching me, you kind of go, yeah, that's obvious. But it's like, that actually wasn't necessarily an obvious link. And it's not an obvious link for so many of us. When, so for people in our lives, friends and family, if they come to us with a problem, how often am I thinking, yeah, I probably played a part in the cause of this mental problem in their, this mental block in their life. That's definitely just not top of the line. So, maybe that's part of something as well in noticing. But I think for me, it goes all the way back to Stephen Covey. I think the first law is like, in a sense, taking responsibility. and we've talked about ownership before as well. And I want to be going in my life when I have insights, and in the lives of my friends when people have insights. I want to be helping people and myself to take responsibility to move forwards with that. So yeah, I suppose we're coming towards the end of the episode. Are there any ways that we can, any practices, any ways that we can help people to be first maybe having those good insights, and then a couple of action steps to take action on those insights?
Well, exactly. And I think that it's a reminder that information does not equal like transformation. Insight doesn't necessarily lead to action. And the famous one is that most of us now know that we should eat 5 fruit and veg a day. But many of us, a huge majority, don't. And so that ultimately, if we took that as an example, well, how would you actually eat more fruit and veg? Well, now you know it, you have to put that into your 3 meals a day, your breakfast, your lunch, your dinner. Actually, when you're doing your meal planning and you're sitting down, you go, oh yeah, let's maybe take something out and put more vegetables in. At lunch, let's make sure I pack an apple and some oranges, or like, grapes, or just whatever it is that you actually need to sit down and plan it and schedule it and think, what's the action? And that's where James Clear's stuff is really helpful. Is, well, you have this insight, this awareness. Do you actually want to make a change, or are you just happy knowing it? But I think that it's fair to be honest. Like, what's my real motivation here? Do I really want this? Am I willing to change for this? And then if you are, schedule it, put it in, like write it down, just start putting it in. Don't hope that something will change, especially if you're set in a pattern.
Yeah, I think so. Something that else has come to mind when I was researching so many things on this topic of insights in action was in the business world, and a lot to do with marketing insights. But one thing did stand out to me, and it was just sort of in this process of looking at insights and turning it into action, always begin and end with the goals, or I suppose in our framework that we've been looking at, always begin with that end in mind. So I can have an insight about myself, but depending on where I envision, how would I want to live? What does my life look like? Actually, I can take that insight and action it in so many different ways. Because the insight could be something like, actually, I show up in certain conversations like this all the time. Well, I want to be doing this. Therefore, I'm going to change the way I interact. Or actually, no, that's fine. I don't have to change anything because that doesn't impact on my life goals or whatever. Yeah. So it's only through that lens of, I know kind of the direction I want to be moving in, that I can then take action on those insights.
Yeah, like I know the type of person I want to be. I know the type of life I want to be living. And that helps, hey, is this a realization worth actioning, or is it not? Is this in line or is it not? Is it important right now or not? So yeah, I think that's a really good place to just think about, where do you want to be? And when you have those realizations, and I think that's one thing that's quite helpful, track them, write them down. When you have an insight, when you see something about yourself, about someone else, about something that is important to you, write it down. Because I can't even imagine how many insights I've forgotten because I didn't write them down. Like, oh, I did notice that, but I haven't noticed it since.
Yeah, in the moment of the insight, it kind of goes, the world, the heavens open up, you have this moment, wow, it's so clear, and I'll remember this always. Yeah, no chance, you'll have forgotten it by breakfast tomorrow. So it could be a paper notebook, it could be a digital note, where you literally go personal insights or something. That might be the best way because it's easily accessible wherever you are. I would highly recommend. And I suppose the last thing I would say in this journey, so we've talked a little bit about recording those insights and framing them in that wider goal, but in terms of turning things into actions, I have found no tool better than coaching, a coaching series where, as you said, literally the pattern is you turn up and it's kind of, so how did your action goals go last week? And sometimes that's the moment of insight. I didn't do anything. Okay, well, let's get an insight onto why that is. And then let's, but it is always, you don't just sit at the insight and go, well done, let's pat ourselves on the back. That was great. We've learned something. No, it's like, okay, now what are we going to do with that? And I always liked, you were good at going, What's 2, 3, maybe 4 action steps? Okay, now choose a couple of them. You know, so think a little bit beyond the most immediate ones. Think of 5 or 6, or maybe even 10 potential action steps to get you really creative, and then pick one that goes, actually, yeah, that will make sense.
Yeah, I find it's a brilliant tool to help move forward. So if you want to have some coaching, get in touch in all the usual places. Email should be in the
Show notes.
That's the one. But yeah, that's all for today's episode. Thank you for joining us on the Make It Count podcast, and we'll speak to you or see you next week.